I was living the perfect life, or so I thought. Kyle and I had been married for 8 years, and we had everything figured out: our beautiful home, our two amazing kids, Emma and Jake, and a comfortable routine that worked for everyone. Kyle had been with the same company for 10 years, working his way up, and I had my own interests and social circle. Sure, his father, Harold, was always lurking in the background with his judgmental looks and cold demeanor, but I'd learned to just ignore him. The man had never liked me from day one. And honestly, the feeling was mutual. Harold was one of those old school types who thought no woman would ever be good enough for his precious son. It didn't matter that I'd given him grandchildren or that I kept a beautiful home for Kyle. Nothing I did would ever impress him. So I stopped trying. Why waste energy on someone who was determined to dislike you? I had better things to do with my time, like maintaining friendships and actually enjoying life instead of walking on eggshells around a grumpy old man. Everything changed 5 years ago when Kyle's mother died suddenly of cardiac arrest. I'll admit it was tragic and unexpected, and I felt bad for Kyle's loss. But what I didn't expect was how dramatically it would shift the entire dynamic of our family. Suddenly, Kyle was spending every free moment with his father, and Harold was becoming this central figure in our lives in a way he'd never been before. They were bonding over their grief, having these deep conversations about life and family. And I found myself feeling like an outsider in my own marriage. Kyle started talking about his father differently with this new respect and understanding that, frankly, seemed a little excessive to me. Yes, the man had lost his wife, but that didn't suddenly make him father of the year or erase decades of him being difficult and unwelcoming to me. But Kyle was acting like Harold had transformed into some wise patriarch who deserved endless devotion and attention. Things got significantly worse about 3 years ago when Harold's kidney problems, which he'd apparently been dealing with for years, suddenly became much more serious. Kyle was constantly worried, constantly checking on his father, constantly rearranging our family plans to accommodate whatever medical crisis was happening that week. I tried to be understanding at first, I really did, but it was becoming clear that Harold's health issues were going to dominate our lives indefinitely. The kidney disease progressed rapidly, and before I knew it, Kyle was talking about dialysis schedules and treatment options like he was Harold's primary caregiver instead of his son. I kept thinking that surely Harold would hire professional help or make arrangements that didn't require Kyle to drop everything constantly. But no, Kyle seemed to think it was his personal responsibility to manage every aspect of his father's care. When Harold started regular dialysis treatments, that's when things really went off the rails. Kyle announced that he would be taking his father to every appointment, Saturdays and Wednesdays, like clockwork. Just like that, without even consulting me, half of our weekends were gone. Saturdays had always been our family time when we'd do things together, or I'd have plans with friends. But now Kyle was unavailable every single Saturday because he had to sit in a dialysis center for hours. I tried to be reasonable about it at first. I suggested that maybe Harold could take a taxi or hire a driver. The man certainly had the money for it. Or maybe Kyle could alternate with someone else, or at least skip occasionally when we had important family events. But Kyle acted like I was suggesting we abandon Harold on the side of the road. According to him, this was what family did for each other, and his father needed him. What really frustrated me was Kyle's attitude about the whole thing. He had this martyred, noble air about him, like he was making some great sacrifice for the good of humanity. He'd get up Saturday mornings with this resigned but determined expression, like he was heading off to war instead of just driving his father to a medical appointment. And when he came home, he'd be exhausted and emotionally drained, which meant our weekends were basically ruined even when he was physically present. I started planning things deliberately on those days, hoping Kyle would realize what he was missing. I'd schedule play dates for the kids or make plans with friends or find family events that coincided with dialysis appointments. But instead of getting the message that he was letting his family down, Kyle would just apologize and say he couldn't make it. He'd suggest we go without him. Like his presence wasn't even important to us. The worst part was how Kyle started talking about his father like Harold was some kind of saint. Suddenly, every conversation included some story about Harold's wisdom or strength or how brave he was handling his illness. It was like Kyle had completely forgotten what his father had been like for the first years of our marriage, cold, critical, and completely uninterested in having a relationship with me or really getting to know his grandchildren. I tried explaining to Kyle that there was no point in me putting more effort into a relationship with Harold because whatever I did, he was never going to be impressed by me or accept me as part of the family. Harold had made his feelings clear years ago, and I wasn't going to keep beating my head against that wall. But Kyle acted like I was being unreasonable and selfish for not wanting to spend every free moment catering to someone who had never shown me basic courtesy. The irony wasn't lost on me that Kyle was criticizing my relationship with his father while I was the one who had been making an effort with my own parents all along. I visited them regularly, called them, included them in our lives, but somehow that didn't count because it wasn't the dramatic, crisis-driven devotion that Kyle was showing Harold. As the months went on, our fights about Harold's care became more frequent and more intense. Kyle was missing more and more family events, and I was getting tired of making excuses to other people about why my husband was never available. Emma and Jake started asking why Daddy was always with Grandpa Harold instead of with us. And I didn't know what to tell them. I'll admit that I started saying things about Harold that probably weren't very nice, but I was frustrated and felt like no one was considering how this situation was affecting me and the children. Called him greedy and mean because that's honestly how he'd always treated me. Just because he was sick didn't suddenly make him a different person or erase how unwelcoming he'd been to me for years. The final straw came when Kyle missed Emma's school play because Harold had a bad day and needed extra attention. I had been looking forward to that play for weeks, and Emma had been so excited to see both her parents in the audience, but Kyle chose his father over his daughter, and I realized that this pattern was never going to change. Harold would always come first, no matter what was happening in our actual family. That night, I told Kyle that he needed to make a choice. He could continue prioritizing someone who was going to die soon anyway, or he could focus on the people who were going to be with him forever, his wife and children. I wasn't trying to be cruel. I was trying to be realistic. Harold's condition wasn't going to improve, and Kyle was sacrificing the best years of our marriage and our children's childhood for someone who, frankly, had never appreciated what Kyle was doing for him anyway. Kyle's response absolutely floored me. Instead of recognizing that I was fighting for our marriage and our family, he told me he'd rather choose his father than choose someone who was so evil and selfish to a dying man. Evil and selfish. Those were the words my husband used to describe me for wanting him to prioritize his living family over his dying father. I realized in that moment that Kyle had been completely brainwashed by the situation. He couldn't see that I was the one being abandoned, that I was the one watching my marriage fall apart while he played the devoted son. So I packed my bags. Sometimes you have to make a dramatic gesture to get someone's attention. And I thought that seeing me actually leave would wake Kyle up to what he was about to lose. But Kyle didn't chase after me. He didn't call and beg me to come back. He didn't even seem particularly upset when the divorce papers were delivered. I expected him to want to talk, to negotiate, to try to work things out. Instead, he signed them immediately and sent them back. Just like that, 8 years of marriage were over because Kyle couldn't see past his obsession with his father. My parents supported my decision completely. They could see how unhealthy the situation had become and how Kyle was neglecting his real family. They assured me that I was doing the right thing by not enabling Kyle's codependent relationship with Harold, and that eventually he'd realize what he'd thrown away. I heard through mutual friends that Kyle and the kids had moved in with Harold, which honestly seemed like a recipe for disaster. Kyle had never been great at managing the children on his own, and now he was trying to be a single parent while also caring for a sick old man. I figured it would be a matter of weeks before he was overwhelmed and desperate to reconcile. But months went by, and Kyle seemed to be managing just fine without me. I heard that he, Harold, and the kids had settled into some kind of routine and that the children were actually spending a lot of time with their grandfather. Part of me felt vindicated. See, I thought Harold does have energy for the grandchildren when it suits him. He just never made an effort when I was around because he didn't want me to be part of it. I was building a new life for myself, focusing on my own needs and interests for the first time in years. It was actually liberating not to have my schedule constantly disrupted by Harold's medical emergencies, or Kyle's guilt-driven devotion. I could make plans and keep them. I could spend time with friends without having to worry about rushing home to accommodate someone else's crisis. Then, about 8 months after our divorce was finalized, I got a call that Harold had died peacefully in his sleep. I'll be honest, my first thought was that maybe now Kyle would realize how much time and energy he'd wasted on someone who was always going to die anyway. Maybe he'd see that I'd been right all along about not investing so much in a relationship that had an inevitable expiration date. I didn't go to the funeral. It would have been awkward and hypocritical given how things had ended between Kyle and me. Plus, I figured Harold wouldn't have wanted me there anyway, and Kyle probably needed space to grieve without having to deal with the complications of our failed marriage. About a week later, I heard something that absolutely shocked me. Apparently, Harold had left everything to Kyle: his house, his business, all of his assets, everything. I knew Harold had money, but I had no idea he was actually wealthy, like seriously wealthy, multimillionaire wealthy. And Kyle had inherited all of it. Suddenly, a lot of things made sense. Kyle's unwavering devotion to his father, his willingness to sacrifice our marriage for Harold's care. Maybe he'd known all along what was coming. Maybe this had all been some elaborate long game to secure his inheritance, and I'd been completely played. My parents were as shocked as I was. They couldn't believe that Harold had been sitting on that kind of wealth while Kyle was working a regular job and we were living a middle-class lifestyle. And they definitely couldn't believe that Kyle was now a multimillionaire while I was starting over with nothing. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I deserved a portion of that inheritance. I had been married to Kyle for 8 years. I had supported him raise his children and been part of that family. Even when Harold made it clear I wasn't welcome. Just because our marriage had ended didn't mean I should be completely cut out of what was rightfully partially mine. I started hearing more details about Kyle's new situation. He'd quit his job to run Harold's business. He'd moved permanently into Harold's house. He was apparently thriving in his new role as a wealthy businessman, and the kids were settled and happy in their new life. It was like our entire previous life together had been erased and replaced with this upgraded version that didn't include me. After thinking about it for several weeks, I decided I needed to reach out to Kyle, not just about the money, although that was obviously a factor, but because I genuinely missed him and the children. Maybe Harold's death could be a new beginning for us. Maybe without his father's influence, Kyle could see clearly again, and we could rebuild our relationship. I asked my parents to come with me when I went to see Kyle, partly for moral support and partly because I thought their presence would show how serious I was about reconciliation. We drove to Harold's house, Kyle's house now, and I have to admit, I was nervous about how he'd react to seeing me. Kyle looked good, rested, confident, more relaxed than I'd seen him in years. The house was beautiful, much nicer than our old place, and it was clear that he and the children had settled in comfortably. But when I started talking about how I'd missed him and the kids, how much I wanted us to be a family again, Kyle's response was not what I'd hoped for. He looked at me with this cold, knowing expression and said, "You don't love me. You love the wealth my dad left to me." It was like he could see right through me, like he knew exactly why I was really there. I tried to deny it, tried to convince him that I genuinely wanted to repair our relationship, but he wasn't buying it. The children were polite but distant. They seemed happy. and settled, and they didn't show any signs of having missed me or wanting me to come back into their lives. It was clear that they'd bonded with Harold before he died and that they were thriving in their new circumstances without me. When it became obvious that Kyle wasn't going to welcome me back with open arms, I decided to be more direct about what I was really there for. I explained that as his ex wife, I was entitled to a portion of his inheritance. We had been married for 8 years during the time when Kyle was building his relationship with Harold and presumably earning his place in the will. I deserved half of what Harold had left him. It was only fair. Kyle's reaction was swift and final. He told me I had no legal right to Harold's inheritance, that it had been left specifically to him, and that I needed to leave his house immediately. He made it clear that I wasn't welcome in his or the children's lives and that any further contact should go through lawyers. My parents tried to reason with him, explaining that I'd been part of the family and that cutting me out completely was vindictive and wrong, but Kyle was unmoved. He had apparently thought this through already and had no intention of sharing Harold's wealth with me. I left that day furious and hurt. Kyle had gotten everything: the money, the house, the business, the children, while I'd gotten nothing but a divorce and a fresh start that I'd never really wanted. It wasn't fair, and it wasn't right. I'd been Kyle's wife during the crucial years when he was earning Harold's respect and securing his inheritance. I deserved to benefit from that too. I consulted with a lawyer about my options, but apparently Harold's will was ironclad and Kyle's inheritance was completely separate from any marital assets I might have had a claim to. The timing of our divorce meant that I had no legal right to anything Harold had left to Kyle, even though I had been part of the family when those relationships were being built. It's been over a year now since Kyle and I divorced, and he's apparently doing incredibly well. He's successfully running Harold's business. The children have trust funds set up for when they turn 18, and they're all living this upgraded life that I'm completely excluded from. I heard he's even planning some elaborate vacation with Emma and Jake, the kind of trip we never could have afforded when we were married. Meanwhile, I'm still trying to rebuild my life and figure out what comes next. I've rented out our old house and I'm living in a small apartment, starting over at an age when I thought I'd have everything figured out. My friends have been supportive, but I can tell some of them think I made a mistake by pushing Kyle to choose between Kyle and me. They don't understand that I was trying to save our marriage from an unhealthy dynamic that was destroying our family. The worst part is that Kyle seems to completely moved on from our life together. He's not struggling or regretting his choices or wishing things had worked out differently. He's thriving in his new role as a wealthy single father, and he's apparently found a sense of purpose and fulfillment that he never had when we were married. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd handled things differently. Maybe if I'd been more patient with Harold's illness, or if I'd found a way to be more involved in his care instead of resenting it, things might have worked out differently. But then I remembered how unwelcoming Harold always was to me, how Kyle prioritized his father's needs over his family's needs, and how unsustainable that situation had become. I still think I was right to demand that Kyle make a choice. A marriage can't survive when one spouse consistently prioritizes someone else over their partner and children. Harold was dying. That was the reality of the situation, and Kyle was sacrificing years of his life and his family's happiness for someone who was never going to get better. What I didn't anticipate was that Kyle would actually choose his father over me, or that his father's death would leave him in such a dramatically improved position. I thought Harold was just a sick old man who was taking up too much of Kyle's time and energy. I had no idea he was actually a wealthy businessman who was going to transform Kyle's entire life with his inheritance. If I'd known about Harold's wealth, would I have handled things differently? Maybe, probably. I might have been more patient with the dialysis schedule and the constant medical appointments if I'd understood what the long-term payoff was going to be, but Kyle never told me about his father's financial situation, so I was making decisions based on incomplete information. Now, Kyle has everything he could want: financial security, a successful business, children who adore him, and a beautiful home. And I have nothing but the satisfaction of knowing that I stood up for what I believed was right, even when it cost me everything. The hardest part is seeing how happy and settled Emma and Jake seem to be without me. They've apparently adjusted well to their new life, and from what I can tell, they don't miss having me around. Kyle has hired help to take care of them when he's working, and they're attending better schools and have more opportunities than they ever would have had in our old life. I keep thinking that eventually Kyle will realize what he's lost, that he'll miss having a partner to share his success with, and that he'll reach out to try to rebuild some kind of relationship. But it's been over a year and there's been no contact at all. He's apparently perfectly content with his new life and has no interest in including me in any of it. My lawyer says there's nothing more I can do legally to claim a portion of Harold's inheritance. The will was clear. Kyle was the sole beneficiary, and my divorce settlement didn't include any future assets that might come to Kyle after our marriage ended. I'm stuck watching from the sidelines while my ex husband enjoys a level of wealth and success that I helped him achieve but will never benefit from. Sometimes I think about reaching out to Emma and Jake directly, trying to rebuild a relationship with them separate from Kyle, but I know he'd never allow it. And honestly, they seem happy and stable in their current situation. Maybe it's better for them to have their father's full attention and resources rather than being caught in the middle of whatever ongoing conflict Kyle and I might have. I've started dating again, trying to build a new life and find someone who will prioritize our relationship the way Kyle never prioritized ours. But it's hard not to compare every new person to what Kyle has become: successful, wealthy, confident, rather than what he was when we were married. I know that's not fair to anyone, but it's difficult to move forward when your ex husband's life has improved so dramatically while yours has gotten so much harder. The most frustrating part is that Kyle seems to have learned nothing from our divorce. He's not reflecting on what went wrong or taking any responsibility for the breakdown of our marriage. He's just moved on completely, as if our 8 years together were just a minor detour before he got to his real life with Harold's inheritance. I suppose there's a lesson in all of this about being careful what you wish for. I wanted Kyle to choose between his father and me, and he did. I just never imagined that his choice would work out so well for him and so poorly for me. I thought I was calling his bluff, forcing him to realize how much he needed me and our marriage. Instead, I gave him permission to walk away from everything we'd built together. And it turned out he was perfectly fine without me. Now I'm left wondering if I'll ever find the kind of happiness and security that Kyle has stumbled into, or if I'll spend the rest of my life regretting the choice I forced him to make. Either way, there's no going back now. Kyle has made it clear that I'm not welcome in his new life, and I have no choice but to figure out how to build something meaningful from what's left of mine.